Hello everyone. In this module, I'm going to walk you around in the .NET family and I'm going to explain the basic difference that the .NET family has in common. Basically, the term .NET family, I'm not sure if anyone uses this term or ever Microsoft has used this term or any of other developers have, but I kind of was finding a perfect word for this, and I thought maybe instead of like .NET environment or .NET editions, I thought maybe .NET family suits all of this very fairly. Now, if you have ever been in .NET, and most of you might have been, you will know that there are two new frameworks in the block. There is .NET Core and then there is .NET Standard. So you see, both of them are kind of new, and if you like look around them, they came in during the same time, like just a year or two is the main difference between them. So it's a bit confusing as to like select which one and to not select which one. And as every beginner has to do, they have to ask questions like, is .NET framework going anywhere? So you see, these are a few of the questions that I'm going to answer in this simple video, and I'm going to like I will try my best to keep it short, but that's not what I'm good in. So okay, so .NET Foundation is basically the foundation, the open source foundation that manages how .NET is driven and how community can participate the in the structure of .NET Foundation. So I kind of think that this is enough, the image that you're seeing. So let's close it out. Okay. So I have quite a few things that I'm going to show you here. First of all, I will walk you through the documentation, then I will take you to a free and open source IDE that you can use, and I have a few other things that you might be interested in. So let's start. Basically, as I already told you that the family term is coined by me, and if someone else did coin it, I'm ready to give all of the credit to them. So .NET family is basically a family of editions of .NET Framework. As you can see, .NET Framework, .NET Standard, then .NET Core. You can target any of them, or you can target multiple or all of them, and your compilers will basically generate all of the binaries for whatever you have written in. So for example, if you want to target .NET Framework and you want to target .NET Standard and .NET Core, so you can add these frameworks to your project and the compiler will build them. So this is basically the high level overview of how .NET Family actually works. So .NET Family is basically a profile that tells the compiler what binaries to generate. So for example, if you're going to build for 32-bit Windows or 64-bit, the profile will tell the compiler what sort of binaries to generate. Similar thing goes for .NET Standard, .NET Core, and so on and so forth. And so basically, at a thousand feet, people say 10,000. I said thousand because we're getting closer. So at 1,000 feet, they're 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 mostly similar. They have C sharp as their default language. They are object oriented. They use NuGet packages. Like they can generate executables. They can be used for web development. So at a really very high level, they are similar. And as we start to go deeper and deeper, we see that they're n- no they're no longer similar. They have many differences in them. Like for example, uh, what what machines do they target? How do they build? And what is their packaged resolution system? Like for example, are they using NuGet? And if they are using NuGet, how do they work? Are they using project or JSON and so on and so forth? So basically, these are a few of the things that every .NET developer must understand before like making a decision of whether to stay in .NET framework or move onward toward .NET Core or .NET Standard and so on and so forth. I I basically took this image from MSTN blogs where they were saying how this .NET Standard was introduced. I forgot to add the reference, sorry, but okay. So basically, s- um, quite a few years ago, one, two, or maybe three, maybe uh, the .NET Core started. So basically, the problem was that .NET framework was Windows only framework, and you cannot install .NET on Linux or Mac. There are some alternate products such as Mono or other like DevShop. That is the name perhaps. So these are a few third-party tools that you can use to like build your own applications uh, using the .NET Core, but that was not .NET. That was basically being consumed there. The runtime was not .NET. It was like, for example, in the Mono, it was Mono runtime. So the problem was to support Linux and Mac, they had to Microsoft had to make sure that the .NET framework is able to run on Linux and Mac. So as if you can see in this diagram, you can see there are base libraries and then there are application models. So all of these three columns, Xamarin, .NET Core, .NET Framework, they have their own application models. Xamarin has iOS, Android, .NET Core has UWP, ASP.NET Core, console, and other. And WPF Windows Forms is in .NET Framework. And then they have their own base libraries, base class, core library, mono class. So just to give you an overview, once you have completely learned .NET Framework and you know how to build a console application in .NET Framework, and if you try to use the same concepts in .NET Core, most of them will work, most of them will not work. So for example, if I'm going to give you an example, if you if you try to use the cryptographic helpers, like if you want to build a library or an application that that calculates the hash of a string or any data, the objects are a bit different. In .NET Framework, you have to create the instances of the concrete, and however, in the case of .NET Core, that's not the code that you would write. It's a bit different, and similar is the case for Xamarin and so on and so forth. And imagine if these are only three, if there were 10 of them, 15 of them, or 20 of these columns, each one targeting one audience, each one targeting one platform or architecture or device. So you would have to like understand and go ahead and read the documentation for how things work in each of them. And that was the main problem that triggered the birth for .NET Standard. So as if you can see over here, previously we had base libraries which were different for all three of them. Now we have just one single library. Now this single library controls how .NET Core, how Xamarin, and how .NET Framework call the base library. I mean, in fact, as a matter of fact, if you go back over here, the base class library, core library, and mono class library is different, but overall, ASP.NET Core, ASP.NET, they are different models. They they should have their own code. But for example, let's say um, the HTTP class, the HTTP client class, if you try to use it in .NET Framework and then the .NET Core has a different implementation of it, that won't work, and that will definitely cause a lot of problems. And once we try to clarify the purpose of libraries, we will see how .NET Standard helps us out in library development. So basically, at the moment, you can see that by adding this one horizontal, we have minimized that problem. Of course, ASP.NET Core must have its own code, and Android code must have its own code, and they must not be similar. and there is no reason for Android code and let's say WPF code to be similar, because at a high level they can be, such as they have windows, buttons, etc. The but the basic code cannot be similar, and it does not have to be similar. So as as of now, I mentioned that there were other tools like such as Mono runtime and other. They were not provided by Microsoft, and Microsoft was not contributing to it, and they were you can say community driven. And if community thought this is good, so it stayed, and if community wanted to like move onward to something else, it would just straightforward move onwards. However, these frameworks are provided by Microsoft under the .NET Foundation, so they are controlled by Microsoft. However, Microsoft alone is not controlling them. The frameworks are also contributed by community, and community selects which or how things go. Like for example, if you ever go to GitHub and you open up the C#7 specification or C#8 or C#6, if you have been in the .NET Foundation or under let's say for example under GitHub a year or two ago, you might have noticed that Microsoft teams that work on compilers or frameworks. So, for example, Roslyn compiler, Microsoft teams do collaborate with you can say the online contributors. Let's say GitHub contributors, GitHub users, and users typically keep providing the feedback. Like for example, they keep telling them the compiler misses this and it should be like this, although the language is pretty much mature and it works, but most of the features are provided by community, and then Microsoft looks at them and says, oh yeah, this one looks promising, and they add that feature to the. So like a year ago I had been watching that community was suggesting C sharp should have tuples, the the concept of functional programming. So the tuple was added, or you can say the tuple was a result of Microsoft's collaboration with the community. Microsoft alone might have not used it because they have F sharp for functional programming, and they might have missed out the tuples from C sharp, saying that no, C sharp is just an object oriented programming. But the community wanted tuples to be a part of it. So if you like, for example, simply go to GitHub and search that, you will find. Anyways, that's not that's not the part of it. So, and the third point is there are some excellent tools provided. Of course, there are some tools. You might have noticed that Microsoft provided Visual Studio Community Edition free of cost, which is a great tool, and you can use it for app development, for desktop development, in fact for any kind of development. And all these three of the standards are provided in .NET framework. .NET framework 2017 is also available that you can try out if you want the preview one. Okay, next one is the now that we have talked about .NET framework, so let's see what frameworks, what features do they have. The open source stuff is that the .NET, let me go to my browser. Okay, the concept is that .NET is open source, and yeah, over here, .NET framework is open source. .NET Core, .NET Standard are both open source. As you can see over here, .NET Foundation, the logo that you saw, .NET Standard, and then .NET Core, etc. They are all open source. And however, the .NET framework itself is not open source. This concept is a bit funny as it might sound. The .NET Core, all of the code that .NET uses, because .NET Core is similar to .NET itself, and each and every API is available. But when you try to look at it, you see that at the moment .NET the open source alternative or the open source alias is .NET Core. It's not .NET Framework. Maybe it's just the way of saying, but overall, the entire .NET Framework is open source. So you can see this is the standard. So for example, and this is the course. Yeah, this is the .NET Core. This is the standard, and you do know their relationships. This is the .NET standard. Basically, I'm not going into the source code. You can definitely open up any of them and read their source code. They do have the source code, and you may work them out, of course, on your own. The .NET framework is Windows only, and I'm talking about the second point. Uh, the .NET framework was Windows only, and it has not yet been migrated anywhere. So, for example, .NET 4.6 is still on Windows. You cannot install .NET 4.6 on Linux or Mac. That's the job of .NET Core. You can install .NET Core 1 on Mac, Linux, and Windows. But the same does not work for .NET Framework. Like I mentioned, Visual Studio Community and Visual Studio Code are provided for free development. The documentation is provided. Now, I'm a very much fan of documentation because each time I stumble upon any kind of error, I go and look for the documentation. And as mentioned over here, the docs.microsoft.com. Previously, it was MSDN. Just for the sake of curiosity, let's go to MSDN. And while that's loading, oh, it did. So you can see that you can read the documentation, API reference, developer center samples, etc. So anytime that you stumble upon any error, you can come over here and try to see what went wrong. Obviously, I try to find 95% of solutions to my problems on documentation after reading the APIs, but your case might be different. However, the new portal for the documentation of the latest upcoming products is the docs.microsoft.com. So, as you can see, it provides you multiple categories: Windows, Azure, Visual Studio, Dynamics, ASP.NET, and all of them. So, for example, you can go through any of them. Since we're talking about .NET, let's open it up. This is the .NET portal, getting started with C Sharp, .NET Core, API reference, .NET Framework, what is .NET, .NET Core Guide, C Sharp, F Sharp, VB, Xamarin, and you can even try something else. So, for example, cloud, mobile. This is the Xamarin desktop, and all of these are available. So you can read them anytime. So, for example, if you want to go over to getting started with C Sharp, you can go over here. You can customize it. You can select if you have ever worked with programming, if you have never, if you're a really very old guy, like for example VB6, and so you can select the tool, command line, etc., and then you can just simply start, and you will the website itself will teach you most of the stuff. So for example, working with strings, creating strings, empty or null, what do they all mean, string operations, etc. So so entire of the .NET framework is documented. The reason why I showed you MSDN was that the previous versions of .NET Framework are available on MSDN. The docs version will also work, but if you want to go and learn about, like for example, .NET 4 or .NET 3, you will have to come over here, and then you will, like for example, go through the APIs. Where is that? This is funny. There is .NET API for Windows Phone, but no .NET. Maybe it's just one single Google away. .NET reference, perhaps. Anyways, so if the latest tools, latest products, etc. will come over here, and all of them you can find them here in a very similar manner. Reference. No, 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 no. These are something else. Yeah, this is what I'm talking about. Is it? Anyways, let it load. Yes, indeed it is. This document is archived and is not being maintained. This is what I was trying to write. So, for example, if you have an older system and an older application, and you want to learn or understand how that works. So, for example, Microsoft.vsa, I have never seen this in my entire life, I swear. So, all of these are available under this archived document. You won't find it over documents.microsoft.com if you even go to the .NET. So you should try out like coming over here and coming over there. So it depends upon which framework that you're having. So if .NET Framework 1.1 it is, you can come over here. In fact, it it might work for .NET Framework 3 and even 4, and up from there you can continue from docs.microsoft. It has a very cleaner uh, it has a really very cleaner look and user experience. So yeah, 3.5, 3, and so on, they all work over there. Let's close these out. Yeah, the next point is the languages that each of the frameworks. Previously we have seen how they work, where they work, and how we should develop them. Now let's try to understand that the languages that are supported are also different. .NET Framework itself supports C++ and C Sharp, VB, F Sharp. There are many others, like for example, you can also use Python. But .NET Core and others, so specifically .NET Standard, they are different. They don't support all of those languages. So for example, I had this. Let's say I come over here, clear this out. This is my Linux system where I run .NET Core. So if I just try to do this, put it work lang. I I just want to break it, nothing else. Yeah. Oh no, silly me. Yeah. So if you just try to look over here, you will see that at the moment it just supports C sharp or F sharp. So if you try to pass like I did here, that was single, I missed it. So if you try to pass C sharp, it will create a project of C sharp. If you pass F sharp, it will create a project of F sharp. Nothing else. It does not know anything else. There is type, but there's something else. So and that's the first difference in them. Up to here, they were just basically they were just basic differences, and the major differences start from here. So if you have the developers who are good at VB.NET, you are definitely going to support .NET Framework, not the .NET Core. All of them support desktop applications. The difference in .NET Core and .NET Framework is that .NET Core does not support graphical applications as of now, because it cannot tell how to render the graphics on Windows, Linux, and Mac. So that's primarily the difference due to which the graphical applications are not possible at the moment. Web development is supported in all of the frameworks. So, for example, if .NET Framework had ASP.NET, .NET Core has ASP.NET Core. So basically, and basically ASP.NET Core is an improved version of ASP.NET. It has many extra features. It has blazingly fast speed, I must say, and a really very fast process of development, hosting, and deployment. It generates responses really very fast. I have tested it, and I can say that it works. And like we said, graphical applications require some tools. Mobile applications. Now, if we come back over here, you can say that Xamarin is based on .NET Standard, so it can be used to build applications for mobiles. As we have seen over here, mobile applications can be built easily, which means that you can use the same code, because we know the code is similar if we're using .NET Standard, following the same standard across all of the platforms and targets. So we can build mobile applications pretty much easily. Entity framework is supported. So basically all of the older frameworks, SQL servers, etc., not a really very legacy library like Silverlight, etc. Maybe they are also supported, but they're not recommended. But entity framework, etc., they are all supported. Entity framework 7 perhaps is the recent version, and it is known as entity framework core. Okay, so I mentioned that library development is a bit different concept as compared to the rest of the programming. Library development basically, uh, when you are developing a library, you are trying to develop a code that must run on other machines or in other projects. So, for example, if you're building a calculator API, you are going to add functions that must execute another on under the projects of other people. So for example, if you build a library with four functions, add, subtract, multiply, divide, and I consume that in my own project, and however each time I try to run it, it said platform not supported, it said platform not supported. That would be of no use at all, and definitely no one will be using the library here. So the library must not require that you have to rewrite the code for every platform. So for example, you have to write one library like calculator.win for Windows, and then you have to write calculator.linux and calculator.mac OS, calculator.android, and so on and so forth. That would be cumbersome, to be honest. So in such cases, .NET Framework is not a good candidate. There is a really very logical reason to this. Now, you see the .NET Framework, although works with NuGet packages, you can import packages, you can export packages, you can do all sort of things. But .NET Framework is Windows only. And of course, if your application or your library to be work is to be used on Windows only, then you can definitely target .NET Framework. And in other cases, you should not consider .NET Framework because it is going to cause a lot of problems, and most of the codes or most of the function calls are going to end up with platform not supported, which is definitely not what the library development is meant to mean, because in that case there is no use for for that library. It's just going to halt the system instead of helping it out. Okay, so the DevOps is a bit of confusing concept for most of them. DevOps basically are just steps to, like, for example, develop the application, build the application, test it, deploy it, and run all sort of configurations for that. So Microsoft has all of those tools. Visual Studio Team Services is one of the framework that I have myself worked on, and I really enjoyed it. Basically, I was just a beginner DevOps, and the interfaces were really very simple. And I'm just not picking these things up. I have a series of videos for beginners that you can see, and you will see how simple all of the process is from zero to hero. You can say you can go in like 2 to 3 hours, and you can set up entire enterprise system within just those 2 to 3 hours, and the framework will itself help you out. And in this area, the difference is zero. The difference in .NET framework family is zero because all of the .NET frameworks are supported, and you can use any of the framework to build your application, and all of on all of your applications will go through the same procedure. They will be built, they will be deployed, they will be tested against. So basically, when it comes to DevOps, the difference is entirely zero. In my own statement, or in my own opinions, the DevOps doesn't matter at all. All of the .NET framework is supported, and like I already said, such as entity framework, all of the old services are supported in these new frameworks because they had to ensure that uh, .NET Core, .NET Standard, and .NET Framework are all same thing. So, like I said, you can implement any of the services entity framework, or you can use older links, LINQ, the link language integrated query, and you can. In fact, link is not an old framework, although it is a very mature one. So you can use all of those services in your .NET Core applications. Initially, there were some issues. Most of the APIs were not rewritten for .NET Core. When I was beginning in .NET Core, there were issues that the HTTP client was not available initially. So we had to, like, for example, go to GitHub and copy the code and try to run it and see if that worked. So basically, now all of that is working since the public release has been issued, and .NET Core in in many ways is mature. And I personally think .NET Core the the .NET that I am going to try out. Basically, I'm not going to work around on .NET Framework anymore just because it has graphical applications. And so I think that will wrap it up. Uh, And my recommendation personal is that if you are going to use graphical applications, then only then you should stick with .NET Framework because it has, like, you can say WPF or Windows Forms. And if your requirement is to work in graphical scenarios, then only then you should consider .NET Framework. In any other case, if you're, like, for example, building a web application, or, like, for example, if you are building anything else like library or other stuff, you should consider .NET Core. Now, in previous slide, I mentioned that for library building, you should consider .NET Standard and not .NET Core. And now I said .NET Core. Well, the reason is that .NET Standard only has an extra topping of mobile platforms as compared to .NET Core. So if you're going to, like, make a library that has to run regardless of the platform, it must run on Windows, and it must run on all others. So a basic example would be to what can I say, like keystroke handling, but there are no keystrokes on Android. So basically, something that has to do with the monitor or with the screen. So if you have to, like, take care of how much uh, how much color is shown on the screen. So if there is some library of that kind that uh, that can be used on all of the platforms, only then you should consider .NET Standard. In all other cases, you should consider .NET Core. And I personally enjoy working with .NET Core on the IDEs that are provided. And just so that if you're curious, I can show you one of the IDEs or the working of it. Where am I? Yeah, okay. So, hello, CS. Is it filled? Hope not. Yeah, of course. nothing of this makes sense to you, don't worry. I am going to create a new tutorial on this, on how to create .NET applications, and I will explain all of these commands and what I am doing in in that video. So don't worry about any of these are just standard procedures for creating a new project. And if you just have the understanding of the of how the terminal works, you will see that I just created a .NET new, which means create a new .NET project under this directory. Then I did a restore, which means that just restore the packages, and so it did. And I'm just going to do run .NET run. The .NET run is similar to pressing the F5, and so it simply just creates the packages. You might have seen bin and obj folders created hello world, cat program.cs. This is the code in that file, and I can use terminal, like for example I can use nano and program, but I'm not going to use that to edit the code. Or I can use any text editor, like for example I can, let's hope it does not break, git, for example. This is the advanced text editor on KDE desktops, so I can use this and it will work perfectly if I just change it. Hello, hello everyone. Saved it. .NET run. Just says it has, and you can see it says hello everyone. But uh, the that's not the best way to do this. I have installed Visual Studio Code on my environment, and so I can make use of that. And how that works, I'm also going to explain that. And I also happen to have a book upcoming which will explain how these things actually work. So for example, now I have opened Visual Studio Code, and voila, you can see that I can now write the code here, and it tells me that it requires a bit assets, yes, and so on and so forth. So basically it provides a much similar, much flexible and much efficient way of writing the code as compared to that text editor based code. And nope, I don't want that up there at the moment. Yeah, so folks, this wraps up the session, and I hope I might have clarified a few of the misunderstandings in your mind at the moment for the .NET. And personally saying, if nothing is required and you just want to learn .NET framework, go with .NET Core. I will personally suggest that you go with .NET Core because .NET Core has so many things that you might want to learn. So for example, in .NET Framework it was Windows only, but on .NET Core you also have to take care about Linux and other platforms. So in these cases, I will personally recommend that you go with .NET Core